All right, this is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine. I want to continue our conversation about anxiety through the functional medicine lens. The number of our patients and clients who are perhaps making day-over-day choices, knowingly or unknowingly, that are promoting a sympathetic nervous system mode, right? Fight or flight or hide. And this is promoting a particular set of more emphasized biochemical conversions, glandular secretions, muscle contractions, circulation. That's in the name of surviving, right? But most of our patients and clients, while they might be living that way, are actually wanting to have more of a parasympathetic life experience. And this is what I like to call rest and digest and make babies and heal, right? The things that are promoted when we are in a sympathetic dominant nervous system mode trying to survive are very different than the ones that are promoted when we are in a parasympathetic nervous system mode, which is what most people want to experience, right? Our patients and clients want to have beautiful skin and optimal weight and perfect bowel movements and fertility at the drop of a hat and excellent orgasms and great skin and clear thinking and all of these wonderful things that are really about having primarily a parasympathetic nervous system experience. And generally speaking, the body is very well designed to live in this mode of thriving and only occasionally having the need to really fight and flight and hide to survive, only occasionally needing to be in that mode so that our dominant experience is parasympathetic. But many people do not realize that the choices that they're making day in and day out are promoting a sympathetic nervous system mode. They're burning the candle at both ends, working long hours, minimizing the experience of sleep. When they feel like they might be getting a cold or a flu, they don't take a day off of work and honor their body and rest. What do? They have extra coffee and just power through. And their exercise is aggressive and their work is aggressive and their outlook on life is aggressive. And this is communicating to the body that we need to be aggressive because, wow, we may not survive. And it's really powerful to explain to your patients and clients that they're just fighting their boss, fighting traffic, fighting extra body weight, fighting a poor self-image, fighting an annoying spouse, fighting all of this hubbub of everyday life. But the body thinks we're fighting for our lives. So the body's taking cues about the status of our world from our choices and our thought processes. And I'm going to get into some more esoteric biochemical dynamics in a few moments. But this is a foundational understanding that our patients and clients need to understand. Because when you are choosing to be exposed to crap food, lots of stimulants, a high sugar diet, maybe unknowingly consuming a lot of food sensitivities, slathering personal hygiene and beauty products on your skin, which are laden with toxic chemicals, minimizing sleep, stressful ruminating thoughts, constantly exposing ourselves to all of these screens. I was saying earlier, cell phones, tablets, laptops, TVs, everything. We're constantly learning about more and more and more ways that bad shit can go down. More and more ways we could die. More and more ways that we are inadequate. More and more ways that we might be being judged. More and more ways that people in other places may be doing bad things that we need to be worrying about. And we wonder why our body goes into a vigilant state. Folks, this is not rocket science. This is a powerful thing to explain to patients and clients so that they can better understand that yes, there are biochemical and physiological reasons why a person can be struggling with anxiety. But very often people will say they have chronic anxiety because the choices they're making day in and day out are telling the nervous system, okay, I get it. We almost died yesterday and the 300 days before that. So today I gave you a massive spike of cortisol, so if you need to run for your life, we can do it, right? Folks, this is not rocket science, right? This is not a complicated concept, right? We have to be able to explain these concepts to the people that we serve so that they can begin to understand that their choices matter, right? the choice to feed their body with a whole bunch of things that are hyper palatable and that are loaded with artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, artificial preservatives, artificial colors, artificial everything, texture modulators, right? Some people's guts haven't seen a real food in a very, very long time. And people are slathering chemicals on their body all the time. I've said it in these Facebook Lives dozens of times. We should not put anything on our skin that we wouldn't be willing to eat. That's a powerful thing to tell a patient and then watch their face. Wait a minute, are you serious? What do you mean eat? I wouldn't eat my sunscreen. Well, then you might want to think about slathering it on your skin, because your skin is a giant mouth and you actually have way less protection from the chemicals that you put on your skin than you do with what you swallow. So yes, personal hygiene and beauty products matter a lot. An awful lot of them are endocrine disruptors that modulate and enhance estrogenic effects. And estrogen overload is one of the ways and one of the hormone imbalances that naturally causes anxiety, right? When a woman is pregnant, doesn't it make sense that she would naturally be primed to be a little extra hyper vigilant in order to ensure the survival of her fetus? Of course it would be. And so again, it's a situation in which we can be promoting an environment unknowingly that is naturally causing increased anxiety, naturally causing some increased vigilance in the name of survival. This is a powerful thing to help the people in our practices understand. Very often there's nothing wrong with the body. We are just making choices that are promoting a nervous system mode on an ongoing basis that is not in service to the life experience that we want to have. I think functional medicine practices around the world are full of this because the conventional medical model can't find anything wrong. And unless you're going to accept taking a benzo or an SSRI, they don't really have anything for this particular patient profile. We've got to get back to education, inspiration, and empowerment of the people we serve in our practices so that they can find ways to take back their health, own the status, the mindset that they're living with, and making different choices. But let's talk about the notion of stress, right? Stress in the body. Mental, emotional stress, most of us can relate to, right? Sometimes it is merited, right? We're having a particularly bad fight or conflict, right, at work or maybe in some of our relationships, and it makes sense that we are stressed, right? We don't want to numb that. Part of the stress is helping us to work through it. It's part of priming the body in order to withstand what we're navigating. But when it becomes chronic and a part of our mindset, right, mental emotional stress can be a very big deal. But we also need to remember that chronic stress can be physiological. And when we talk about stress in the body, we're basically talking about states of relatively high or maybe very high cortisol. Cortisol is the body's bread and butter stress hormone, right? We may get a surge of adrenaline, but the body can't keep that up very long. So eventually we will get a handoff courtesy of the partnership between the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla working together. There's a handoff from the much more powerful, what we call adrenaline or epinephrine or norepinephrine to a secondary degree. And then we trade off going to cortisol. But high cortisol levels can be very anxiety promoting, again, on purpose, because the body thinks there's something that you need to counter, to fight, to run from in order to survive. But it's also true that our HPATG axis, right, the coordination of the hypothalamus and the pituitary with the adrenal gland, our thyroid gland, our gonads, it also involves other hormones like our insulin from our pancreas. There's a hormone symphony that's being orchestrated on purpose in our bodies on a daily basis in order to help us to optimally survive and function in the world we're asking our bodies to live in. And the HPATG axis together collectively goes into a sympathetic nervous system mode. And what happens, right? Some body functions become very primed, right? Our eyesight gets much better, right? We get higher blood sugar. Things like digestion stop working. Our digestive secretions are reduced by 50% or more. We often get a dumping where the upper half of the GI tract slows down and stops working, and whatever's in the colon gets sent out, right? This is why people may develop stress-mediated diarrhea. But what can happen because, well, let me say, first of all, one of the primary hallmarks of that HPA-ATG axis being in a stress mode is that the immune system is suppressed. Now, from a survival viewpoint, this makes sense. If you're running for your life, you don't have time to be sick and need to sleep late or get all of these inflammatory symptoms because your immune system goes into overdrive to fight an infection. You don't have time for that. And the body's not going to waste time giving you high levels of growth hormone to heal either, because the body figures you're running for your life. You're trying to survive. We will heal later, right? We will fight infection later. We will make babies later. We will eat and digest the food later. The problem is a lot of people in our practices, there is no later. This is their norm. There's no later, right? This stress mode, this sympathetic dominant state is their norm, right? And so we don't ever get that time when the stress weans down and we find some peacefulness, and then the body goes into healing mode. And it's really about creating that space where we can prioritize an environment for healing that so many of our stress and anxiety riddled clients and patients need to understand the importance of doing that. They are not going to get rid of their anxiety by just continuing to live that sympathetic promoting lifestyle mode. So we can have high levels of cortisol, right? But here's the thing. A lot of the people we serve are living in that high cortisol state, and they month after month after month, they stay in it. But what happens? We suppress the immune system long enough that we get a simmering infectious dynamic that, of course, the immune system is watching, but keeping under control, but not able to counter fully. But what's going to happen when that stress state is allowed to continue? Eventually, that infection is going to spiral up and be enough of a concern that the immune system needs to respond, because now it's a much more concerning threat. And the hormonal axis, the HPA-ATG axis, on purpose, not because it's broken. Stop telling people that. It's not broken. The HPA-ATG axis is on purpose going to modulate hormones again to bring cortisol down, usually way down, in order to allow the immune system to work. And this is where people who are in an anxious state go from anxiety to a level of depression. Now they have fatigue, malaise, they have trouble getting out of bed. That's because those sky-high cortisol levels have now dropped to dramatically low levels. And what people start to experience is more a level of sluggishness, maybe of depression, again, of malaise, punctuated with occasional moments of that anxiety coming back. And that's because when your cortisol levels are nice and low and your brain is keeping them that way on purpose, but you need a surge of stress hormone, like to get your blood sugar up, your body has no choice but to send adrenaline. And adrenaline has its effect, right? It's a rude awakening. It's anxiety promoting on purpose. And our practices are filled with people who have relatively low cortisol levels, but their lives are punctuated by episodes of huge adrenaline surges, which can be exacerbated to what we call panic attacks, right? Where it's so accentuated because cortisol is so low and the body has to really pop adrenaline hard in order to help you to weather whatever situation you're experiencing. This is why people who have low cortisol levels might be very rudely awakened in the middle of the night while in a fasting state, because normally cortisol keeps blood sugar at a nominal level during a fasting state. But if you have rock bottom, barely there, flatline cortisol levels, that's not going to work. So the body has to send adrenaline, and that is for sure going to wake you up in the middle of the night. And it gets worse because if you don't metabolize stress hormones very well, then once the body creates the stress hormone, whether it's because of mental, emotional things or because of physiological things like toxicity or infectious dynamics, or even food sensitivities, surgery, right? All of these things would increase stress hormones. But you have to metabolize those stress hormones in order for the body's experience to shift to one of calmness.
Well, what if you have genetic impairments in your ability to process stress hormones? So we're obsessed in the progressive or functional medicine world with MTHFR, but there's thousands and thousands of other enzymes that are involved in optimal hormone and neurotransmitter metabolism, and detoxification and other processes that affect anxiety. But one of those is the COMT or the COMT enzyme, which is what metabolizes epinephrine. And if you have genetic impairments in the COMT enzyme, then you're not going to break down that adrenaline very well once it's generated. And so this leaves a lasting, lingering effect that enhances anxiety. But that process is also a methylation process. So we need B vitamins, right? We need B12, we need B6, we need B9, folate. We need adequate protein in order to be able to methylate. And so, yes, you have to detoxify stress hormones in order to get rid of them, right? And cortisol, right? So cortisol is metabolized with either glucuronidation or sulfation, right? Those are the two phase 2 detox processes that break down cortisol. Well, what if you don't sulfate very well, right? You need vitamin B6 in a big way in order to have good sulfation. In order to have good glucuronidation, you need things like glycine and vitamin B5, pantothenic acid. But here's another gotcha, right? We know anxiety is not all in their head, but could it all be in their gut? Well, let's shift gears here for a moment and start talking about some of the physiological drivers for anxiety. So, it's true that our microbes are having a huge impact on our life experience. And many of you have heard me say before that we have this delusion that the brain is in charge. Actually, the microbes and the hormones, if you want to actually know what is immediately modulating and fully in control of your life experience, it's the bugs and the hormones. And microbes produce neurotransmitters. Microbes produce hormones, and in particular, GABA, right? The most predominant inhibitory neurotransmitter in the body is being produced by microbes. And you're going to have more and less levels of GABA being produced depending on what the microbiome population profiles look like, depending on how recently a person has had a course of antibiotics, right? Gut microbial imbalance can have a huge impact on anxiety. We've learned that individuals who have relatively low populations of Bacteroides or bifidobacteria are much more likely to struggle with the extremes of anxiety and depression. So gut function matters in a big way. There are also certain microbial species that produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. And beta-glucuronidase can interfere with the detoxification flow from the liver outside of the body from the stool by cleaving the conjugation that happens between substances the body's trying to get rid of and the glucuronide conjugate, excuse me. This is a great example of how microbial secretions can impair detoxification. This is something that can make it challenging for us to get rid of adrenaline. It can make it challenging for us to get rid of estrogen as well. And so gut health matters in a big way. So yes, there can be mental, emotional drivers for stress, and there usually are, but stress can also be microbiome mediated, right? We get into the world of microbial neuroendocrinology, a powerful example of interconnectedness in the body. But let's talk for a moment, I'm talking about GABA, so let's talk about when we mention the notion of neurotransmitters, and certainly neurotransmitters can be involved in anxiety. I just find practitioners way too often jump to the notion of, oh, you're anxious, you need more serotonin. No, probably not, right? In the world of serotonin, one of the most common reasons why a person would actually have a depletion of their serotonin is because they have been using an SSRI or an SNRI medication for quite some time. Because the body has enzymes that override the drug's desire to keep a lot of serotonin active in the synapse. Sounds great on paper, but the body is not easily outfoxed. And so the body naturally just sends out more of the MAO enzyme in order to break down the serotonin and also the dopamine that is left in the synapse. And what that means is when people have been taking these reuptake inhibitor drugs for quite some time, they may indeed have created a pretty dramatic depletion of both serotonin and dopamine over time. And those individuals may indeed, as they withdraw from the drug and titrate down, they could really enjoy some benefit from supporting serotonin and dopamine synthesis. But I say that is not as common as people think. It's definitely common in people who've been on those drugs for an extended period of time, especially longer than a year. But generally speaking, the imbalances that are much more likely to be at play in chronic anxiety are issues with Gaba glutamate balance, right? So if we think about, we have all these different neurotransmitters and amino acids that function as neurotransmitters, but GABA and glutamate, right? The body can easily turn one into the other, right? In order to either turn up neural transmission overall, which requires more glutamate, or to turn down neurotransmission overall, which involves promoting more GABA. And we have a lot of modern challenges that skew GABA glutamate balance. Excuse me, people who go to bed at night and tend to lie there ruminating, right? And they just can't get their mind to calm down, often are having trouble with a GABA glutamate imbalance. And this is where things such as supplementing with taurine, right, can really be helpful for that, or a little bit of bioavailable B6 in the pyridoxal 5-phosphate, P5P form, can be quite supportive for that. In terms of just modulating the GABA glutamate balance a little bit. We've done Facebook Lives before about sleep and how critical sleep hygiene is. Because if you are doing things in the evening that are making your body think, oh my gosh, we've really got to run for our lives. But we're doing things like watching crime shows or the evening news or having an argument with our spouse or paying bills or reading email or making a to-do list that feels overwhelming for tomorrow's workday. This is promoting higher levels of glutamate and lower levels of GABA naturally because we're doing very stressful things in the hour or two before bed. That's just bad sleep hygiene. Nothing's wrong with the body. The body is making a choice to go into survival mode because our choices are telling it that's a smart thing to do. So we want to be cautious about sleep hygiene. GABA glutamate imbalance is a real challenge. Someone posted just a moment ago about ADHD, right? And individuals who have ADHD, it can be really challenging for them to wind down enough in order to relax, to allow melatonin to work. So the cortisol can go down, glutamate can go down, melatonin goes up, and GABA goes up, and we naturally sleep. Fabulous supplement for that if people need something beyond good sleep hygiene. But I find a lot of people just need good sleep hygiene. But an awesome supplement for that is L-Theanine, which is also safe for children. Really wonderful clinical studies actually looking at using L-Theanine as high as 400 milligrams for adolescent kids in order to help them to mellow out enough in order to be able to fall asleep, right? Again, nothing's broken in the body. Our choices are just promoting a hypervigilance, right? So, I got so many topics I want to talk about here. So the one thing I want to make sure that I get in right away, the fastest way to increase your cortisol on a day-over-day basis for any human being is to not sleep well. And this is actually, in my clinical experience, the most important thing to teach your patients and clients about regarding anxiety. Yes, nature's Xanax, exactly. So here's the thing. If we are sleeping fitfully for very short periods of time with a lot of interruptions, it's very natural that the body assumes, oh, there we are, back in survival mode again. And where the body is naturally going to arise the next day primed for something stressful. This is not rocket science, and it's not a novel, crazy idea. We know from multiple clinical studies that bad sleep, poor sleep, increases cortisol the next day. Bad sleep multiple days in a row creates a much higher cortisol awakening response. Bad sleep even longer creates that high cortisol awakening response to prime you to be ready for stress, and it happens even earlier in the morning. So your patients who have this, I'm wide awake at 5 o'clock in the morning, like wide awake, like I can do math. I'm wide awake at 5, but I want to sleep till 7. That is very often a strong cortisol awakening response. And the body is doing it on purpose because it thinks you need it in order to run for your life and to survive. Because cortisol surging in the morning is what forces melatonin down, so you shake off your sleepiness. All of the body's different circulation gets jump-started into action. We need that cortisol pop in the morning, but if it's super duper high, it is going to interrupt sleep and likely get people up too early. Give me a thumbs up if you've had a patient or client where you've realized the number one thing in their way of wellness that maybe is the furthest most upstream root cause of disease is poor sleep. Unbelievable how often I see this. People are looking for a pill. They want there to be some fancy name, fancy intervention for what they're wrestling with. And we just got to find a way to educate, inspire, and empower people about the importance of sleep and to stop treating sleep as a nice to have. You know, when I guess on the weekend and when I'm on vacation, then I'll think about sleeping. Otherwise, an awful lot of the people we're serving are trying to find ways to avoid sleep. It's like a badge of honor. I only need 5 hours a night. Oh, you only need 5 hours. I only need 4 hours and 45 minutes. What are we doing? We're arguing. We're competing with one another on who can get away with less sleep. There's something terribly broken about our mentality that yielding to what the body most needs in order to heal, in order to replenish, in order to detoxify. Sleep in order to help us process our feelings and our experiences. We've just got to be willing to see sleep as being a deeply powerful and respected intervention. And I have found that it's crazy beneficial for chronic anxiety. And a big part of that is sleep hygiene. So GABA glutamate imbalance is a big issue, and here is the challenge. When our inflammation, when we have chronic inflammation, right? Not inflammation because of a cold, right? Or a transient thing. That's perfectly normal. We want to be inflamed when we have an injury, when we're fighting an infection, right? There's a reason for inflammation. But when people have chronic simmering infectious dynamics or toxic dynamics, and we get that chronic low-grade inflammation, inflammation naturally impairs glutamate to GABA conversion. And again, if you think about it, it makes sense. The body figures, I'm inflamed. I have a problem. Something's wrong. I want to stay alert. I want to stay vigilant. I want to be able to survive. And because people are eating crap food, people have chronic simmering, especially metabolic dynamics with excessive levels of blood glucose. We have a lot of people with impaired GABA glutamate balance. And so this is where addressing the underlying physiological dynamics, right, like toxicity, like metabolic dysfunction, insulin resistance, for example, like IBS or various dysbiosis, microbial dynamics, right? These all promote anxiety, and because anxiety suppresses the immune system, anxiety promotes those disease processes. It's a vicious cycle, and the way out of it is to learn to honor the parasympathetic nervous system healing mode, to take some time off, to rest, to heal, to sleep, to allow the body to regenerate, to allow the immune system to fight infection, right? This is something that our body needs us to do on an ongoing basis. I also want to mention that oxidative stress, right? We talk a lot about inflammation, but we also have an epidemic of our patients and clients who are wrestling with overloads of oxidative stress and oxidative damage to tissues. And that's caused by the same old usual suspects, right? Elevated blood sugar naturally causes oxidative damage to various tissues, and that oxidative damage attracts inflammation, and inflammation causes more oxidative damage, and the oxidative damage attracts more inflammation. And we have this escalating process of disease, which again, if it were only occasional, would be great. But people are living in this as their normal, and it's promoting anxiety on a regular basis. I want to give you some other things to think about that can be promoting anxiety. Certainly one of them is excessive intake of stimulants. Not rocket science, but amazing number of people who struggle with anxiety who drink 2 grande Starbucks coffees on a daily basis. And a lot of those coffees may not even be coffee. It's more like a coffee flavored sundae in a cup, right? That has more sugar than a pint of real ice cream. Some people are even more sensitive, like myself included, more sensitive to the stimulants in chocolate, in dark chocolate, which is theobromine, not caffeine. Those are 2 different substances. They come from the same family, but the body metabolizes them differently. So some people really well tolerate dark chocolate at night, but a cup of coffee would be a disaster area, but other people are vice versa. If someone struggles with anxiety, I recommend no coffee after 10 a.m. in the morning. No more coffee. That's it, right? Folks who have done different types of, cleanse type of programs with me have been shocked to figure out how much better they sleep and how much less anxious they feel by simply not having another cup of coffee at 11 and another cup of coffee at 2, much less one at 4:30 in the afternoon for that pick-me-up. What some people do find is a cup of green tea, which has a little bit of caffeine in it, but a lot of L-theanine can actually be a wonderful thing because you get the little bit of caffeine, and it's a very small amount, which can be mentally boosting in terms of clarity and focus, but you get the L-theanine, which naturally takes the edge off of that so the effects aren't extended. Which can be a great alternative, right? It's about trying to find alternatives that are palatable, that are acceptable to our patients and clients. Think about individuals with insulin resistance, right? Low blood sugar promotes anxiety. High blood sugar promotes anxiety. Individuals who may have the early stages of metabolic dysfunction where their fasting glucose, according to the conventional practitioner, looks perfect, right? Their fasting glucose is like 75, but they eat the standard American diet. That should really be a red flag in your mind. If you were to measure fasting insulin, it's probably 15, 18, 27, 35. This is metabolic disease happening. It's just way earlier than we typically diagnose it. But high levels of insulin throughout the day, especially in a fasting state or when a person happens to eat a lower carbohydrate meal, that's going to promote low blood sugar. And how does the body respond to low blood sugar? With a surge of stress hormones on purpose to save you from the low blood sugar. And so this is where someone may feel jittery from the low blood sugar, which is anxiety producing. And then they go and address it with a whole bunch of sugar and cause a big blood sugar peak, which is also stressful, and then a trough, which is also stressful. So think about looking at blood sugar levels. Check for hemoglobin A1C, check fasting glucose, check fasting insulin. I really want all of us collectively to start looking for insulin resistance earlier, right? We've got to get way in front of prediabetes. Prediabetes, metabolic dysfunction has often been in place for years and years before it's diagnosable as prediabetes. We've got to get there when their fasting glucose looks perfect, but their fasting insulin is suboptimally elevated. The other thing to think about is food sensitivity. So I am amazed at the number of people who have elevated cortisol levels because their body is having a stress response to foods, everyday foods that a lot of people eat. And when people consume those, their body thinks is being attacked by something threatening. And so they get a surge of cortisol. And if they stack multiple unknown food sensitivities in the same snack or meal, they may actually get heart palpitations, right? They feel breathless. They get that sense of hypervigilance, right? And we need to keep in mind that stress hormones helped us survive to be here having this conversation. So there is a priming where it doesn't matter whether the stress begins in the body or begins in the mind. Once it begins, it fuels higher stress hormone levels, which if a person isn't educated by you to know what's happening, they're going to allow their stress hormones to make them more stressful. So it builds and they're more stressed. and they react to that, and the body responds and it builds, and we get these escalating things when they're particularly pathogenic. We call them a panic attack. But this low-grade escalating anxiety, where the mental emotional is feeding the physiological and back and forth, is happening in millions and millions of people in our practices every day. It's ubiquitous. So let's see. Let's talk about magnesium, because that's the supplement that tends to come to mind for people all the time when we're talking about countering anxiety. And yes, we do have an epidemic of magnesium deficiency. It is not as present in our soil now even than it was in the 1970s, much less 100 or 1,000 years ago. And if a mineral is not in the soil, it can't be in your food, right? Minerals don't just poof occur in foods, right? They have to be in the soil. The plant makes vitamins courtesy of the sun and water, but minerals have to come through the roots from the soil. And we have a lot of topsoil erosion, and magnesium has become highly depleted in our farming soils, even organic soils. So people often need magnesium. Now, the forms of magnesium that are going to be the best for anxiety are taurate and threonate. Magnesium taurate and magnesium threonate. Taurate, right, is a amino acid chelate with taurine, and threonate is an amino acid chelate with threonate, both of which penetrate the blood-brain barrier. And taurine actually acts on its own as a calming neurotransmitter, and threonine also helps to calm anxiety, both in the mind as well as in the peripheral nervous system, which can help with things like tremor and spastic movement. Great supplemental therapy for people with Parkinson's disease or MS, by the way. But magnesium is indeed often an issue. And to a question there, right? So I think the next best form would be the glycinate form, right? Conjugated with glycine, which also can have a calming effect in the brain as well. So I would say if people are not, first of all, I would try to get red blood cell magnesium data so you have a baseline and you know whether they are just slightly suboptimal or terribly deficient. That really impacts the dose. But if you don't have any data and you're not going to get data, I often recommend starting with maybe 400 milligrams of magnesium a day, maybe 200 in the morning, 200 in the afternoon. Unless someone is having trouble sleeping, then I might do it at lunch and then again at night in order to help to calm the body. So magnesium is definitely important, but I want to talk about some other nutrients that are super critical. A major cause of anxiety is your patients who are deficient in essential omega-3 fats. In fact, we were having a chat the other day on our practitioner forum with the number of people who were talking about terrible sleep improving because people doubled their fish oil supplementation dose, right? You can get some very simple testing, omega-3 index, in order to see whether a person has optimal levels of cellular omega-3 or not, right? And cellular levels of nutrients can be really different from serum or plasma levels. We know that, right? But omega-3 is hugely important. And for keeping a balance in the body, right? Omega-3 is naturally really quite anti-inflammatory, which again helps to promote Gaba. So there's something to think about. Vitamin B6. If you have a patient or client who is taking your typical B50 supplement, right? 50 milligrams of vitamin B6 is way, 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 way too much for most people. Especially if people are not converting it really well to its final form so that they can make use of it, and they're just getting a build-up of pyridoxine in their blood, right? Which can also cause neuropathy. Vitamin B6 is one of those Bs that if a person has not been getting adequate B vitamins for a while, you really want to start low and slow. And I recommend starting with all P5P form, the activated form, and maybe beginning with just maybe 7 to 10 milligrams, a small amount in order to allow the body to build up gradually.
the vast majority of people do not need dozens of milligrams of B6. They just don't. Because what is B6 doing? Well, it's synthesizing serotonin. It's synthesizing dopamine, which the body turns into adrenaline, especially in a high copper state. If a person doesn't have optimal copper-zinc balance, then adding a lot of B6 can be promoting the synthesis of more adrenaline, especially if lifestyle choices are promoting it. B6 is also critical for being able to metabolize sex hormones. We need B6 in order to metabolize estrogen, especially to methylate estrogen down the lesser or less carcinogenic pathways. And using oral birth control pills can deplete a number of nutrients, but the number one nutrient that oral contraceptives will deplete over time is vitamin B6, which is a terrible catch-22 because it's the one that we most need in order to handle the estrogen overload that a lot of people are put on birth control pills in order to manage in the first place. I was talking about food sensitivities and I interrupted myself. So let's go back to that. Gluten. I really want you to think about gluten being a huge mediator of anxiety. I can't tell you the number of people who have described to me when they've done a reintroduction after eliminating gluten for a few months to say, either gluten makes me really anxious, or especially in men, to tell me that gluten makes them angry, irritable, furious. I've had several men tell me I am filled with rage after I eat gluten, right? Well, this perhaps makes sense in terms of promoting a pro-inflammatory environment if they have a food sensitivity to gluten, and so they get an antibody creation on the other side of that, right? Which has inflammatory effects by design, right? Because the body's really not sure if that donut you ate was a food or a foreign invader, right? We have huge issues with this, but I really want you to think about food sensitivities being a driver for anxiety, and even a short-term elimination diet can be really powerful for seeing what clears up for people over time. But in particular, when people start talking about rage, extreme irritability, so the more advanced clinical tips here for you: think gluten, think mercury, think yeast, right? Those are some pearls we talk about in some of our cases. Those are some puzzle pieces you want to play around with and see if the clinical presentation fits otherwise. But gluten is very often involved in that particular mosaic. I want to talk a little bit about, let's see, other things that people are consuming. L-Glutamine. Well, here's a real catch-22 for you. We know that L-Glutamine supplementation, if people are struggling, the theory is, with a leaky blood-brain barrier, where glutamine, the brain and central nervous system is getting overexposed to L-Glutamine through supplementation. And again, glutamine is very common in a diet, but it's about getting an acute, refined dose. And this is a common supplement that we recommend for healing enhanced intestinal permeability in the small intestines. And it is very powerful for that, but in a small subset of your population. Please don't go thinking this happens to everyone, but we need to have a big toolbox because everyone's different. In my experience, in about 5 to 10% of people, L-Glutamine supplementation will promote anxiety. So when you're thinking about what is someone doing, they started getting anxiety out of the middle of nowhere, think about your gut healing supplements. And if they have a high dose of L-Glutamine, that might be a challenge for them. And they might need to use something that maybe doesn't have L-Glutamine in it, but uses other things for healing intestinal permeability, like quercetin or NAC or various mucilaginous herbs. Making sure vitamin D is optimal, but to be very careful with L-Glutamine supplements for a person who already has anxiety. If a person isn't really struggling with anxiety, don't worry about it. I don't want you to be afraid of L-Glutamine, but just be cautious in people who have strong anxiety because the L-Glutamine could exacerbate it. I said vitamin B6, too much of it can promote anxiety, but so can too less. So I think B6 is the B vitamin to be most aware of in terms of balancing in the case of anxiety.
We spoke of too much sugar, too many stimulants, but also think about artificial sweeteners. I've had a number of people in my practice who struggle with anxiety because they were consuming aspartame as an artificial sweetener, and it was a huge anxiety mediator for them. And for that matter, there are people with absolute legitimate MSG, like pathological responses to MSG in foods, and anxiety is also one of the most common symptoms for that as well. So lots of things to think about here. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'm going to have to finish up soon, I know. Let's see, but I want to talk about some other simple interventions. If you have a patient that is really struggling with anxiety, a lot of their mindfulness practices would be of value to them. But I'll tell you, and this is what we emphasize at SAFM, just the practical tribal wisdom of doing this work. I could tell you all sorts of theoretical solutions, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how awesome my idea is. If a patient isn't going to go home and do it, my idea is literally worthless, which is why at SAFM, we're on fire about teaching the science in a rigorous way, but you got to get beyond the science into the practical know-how of applying this information in a way that actually changes lives. And so, for example, if a person is riddled with anxiety, they are not going to meditate, my friends. That's not going to happen. It's too much. It's like taking someone who eats at McDonald's 3 meals a day and saying, you know, you really should make salmon and broccoli at home. They're not going to do that either. It's too big of a leap. We have to meet people where they are and make progressive, sustainable lifestyle change. So we have to be creative. You or someone in your practice has to be creative. And so the mindfulness practice that I have found that is most accessible to people who have lots and lots of anxiety is gratitude journaling. Please write that down. It's something they can do, something physically they can do, and it's a way to short circuit the ruminating, negative, worrying thoughts that are spiraling up in them. Gratitude journaling is very simply sitting down and writing 5, or maybe you start with only 3, detailed things that you are grateful for. And you have to teach them. It's not family, friends, health. No, that's not a gratitude list, right? Gratitude list is very specific things, right? I am grateful that last night when I was stressed out, my cat jumped up into bed and it's almost like he could sense that I was anxious, and he curled up on my chest and just purred, and I felt like that purring was settling my heart, and it helped me to relax, and I fell asleep, and I'm so grateful for this cat. That is a gratitude journal entry, right? Something that's detailed and emotional, that provokes positive or reassuring or warm emotion. Because then as a person starts to fill a gratitude journal, they can go back and read these things as a way of connecting to the good, the stable, the fun, the loving, the accepting, the peaceful, right? In their lives, the stable, the secure. These are things that they can hearken back to and anchor. And so if you don't teach your patients today about things like gratitude journaling, then I would challenge you that the work you're doing may not be creating sustainable health. Because if we're really going to optimally use the wisdom of functional medicine science in our practices to truly change healthcare, to truly transform healthcare, we've got to not just help people to get well, we've got to help people stay well. Otherwise, it's just the revolving door disease. They're going to keep showing up every 6 months with something else that's broken. You know, we talk all the time at SAFM about the revolving door of stool tests, right? It's ridiculous. The number of people who go to functional practitioners and the true upstream root causes are not being addressed. So, you know, you get a stool test, you get it treated, you're better for 3 months. And then you get another set of symptoms. So you go back, you test again, you get another set of interventions, you feel better for 3 months, and you come back. Functional medicine has a branding problem because 3 years later, what, a person has bought $5,000 worth of stool tests? Are they well? No. If anything, what they've learned is that the body is not very resilient and the shoe could fall at any moment and they're probably just not ever going to be able to get well. This is a nocebo effect. We've got to be more effective at going further and further upstream beyond the glitter. And I get it, it's geek's paradise. But beyond the glitter of the fancy tests, so that after someone starts to even begin to get well, you, me, or somebody in your practice is spending enough time with that person to help them to identify choices that they can do, that they are willing to do, that they will commit to do in order to maintain that wellness. We've got to do that work. That's what the thorough practice of functional medicine entails, right? It's about the creation of health, the creation of actual wellness, and then sustaining it. And so I really want to encourage you in your practice to go beyond that. So I've shared a lot today, been jumping all over the place, but I hope that this has been of service to you. Want to think about the gut. You want to think about hormone and neurotransmitter issues, especially high insulin, high estrogenic states, which may not be ovaries gone wild. It usually isn't. It's not high estradiol. Serum estradiol may look perfect or even low, but it's a high estrogenic state because of all those personal hygiene and beauty products that we slather on our skin that potentiate estrogen, right? Or it could be optimal levels of estrogen, but low progesterone, right? Because when we're fighting and flighting, the body makes less progesterone. Why? Because you don't want to have a baby. You would need to maintain a pregnancy when you're running for your life. Why would you do that? So hormone and sex hormone imbalance can be involved. High insulin can be involved, and either high or low cortisol, right? So we want to think about sleep. We want to think about mindfulness practices like gratitude journaling, maybe helping people who are in a lot of anxiety to trade their running or their kickboxing for yoga and not hot power yoga, right? People who have low cortisol states are the ones who tell you they couldn't live without their runs. Because when they go running is the time their stress hormones actually come up enough that they feel normal, right? We want to think about people who have inadequate levels of omega-3 essential fats. We want to think about people who have insufficient levels of B vitamins, who don't methylate very well. These are some of the connections with anxiety that I hope can shed a bright light on some of the actual root causes for the patients and clients that you serve. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. Here at SAFM, if you have enjoyed what you experienced today and are considering engaging in some advanced clinical education in order to take your healthcare practice to the next level, I invite you to check out our semester programs. Our Core 101 and Advanced 202 semester programs are accredited for continuing medical education credits. And so here our student body at SAFM typically has about 15 different healthcare modalities. Anything from physicians and nurse practitioners to chiropractors, acupuncturists, dietitians, nutritionists, health coaches, midwives, health educators, bodywork specialists, pharmacists, dentists, counselors, physical therapists. We have a nice, rich, diverse, global family of practitioners, and all of our students already have their license or certification as required by their modality, and they already have an active practice. So we are perhaps unique in being the best place to grow an existing practice fueled with the practical application of functional medicine know-how. So if you feel like now might be the right time to advance your clinical prowess, then I invite you to check us out. We're not a great fit for everyone, but we just may be the next thing you're looking for to rocket your practice to the next level. Have a great day.